I would introduce your next speaker now, but surprise, it's me. I'll tell you a little bit more about me than I have. My name is Keely Butrum. I'm from this local area as well. And I grew up here doing everything you want your children to do. I pursued every achievement that I was conditioned to believe was the path to success, therefore the path to happiness. I played sports. I was in basketball, softball, cheerleading. I was football athletic trainer. My freshman year, I was peer selected for homecoming court, and sophomore year, I was educator selected for a state convention where only one student was chosen to represent the school on the basis of leadership and academics. Up to the point I was about 16, I had done everything that I was supposed to do. And I was starting to recognize that for some reason, I still didn't feel very happy. I think that I thought through those accomplishments that happiness would be waiting right behind the next one. And when I got there, it was such a fleeting experience and really meant nothing to me long term. So that is where I now recognize that my struggle with mental health began. Now, I've come a long way since then. A lot of you in here know me from doing community nonprofit activities. I represent my district on the Greenfield City Council, and I've had a successful career already at a young age in finance. But it was a struggle in getting there, and that's why I'm passionate, as well as these people, about sharing on it so that others might feel enlightened or empowered based on an experience that they're having. About the time I was 16 or so, things really started to change. We recognized that I was struggling. My parents could see it, and we tried to find solutions, but I was really kind of shutting down in a lot of ways. I was convinced that adults were just power-wielding people who were handing down their instructions all the time. I just felt smothered and thought I just wanted independence. Happiness must be right around the corner of independence. And so I really just spent a lot of my time longing for the future, longing to be an adult and do whatever I wanted to do and find out what life had to offer. And my junior year of high school, I went to the guidance counselor and told them, I don't care about graduating with honors. I want out of here as soon as I turn 18. I'm moving on. I'm looking for something else. And so I did. I restructured my schedule, all those advanced placement classes that I'd been taking my entire life and getting A's effortlessly out the window. It meant nothing to me. I was going to go find wherever happiness lied. And you guys might be surprised to find that I thought happiness lied in Mexico. 6 months before my 18th birthday, I bought a one-way ticket to Mexico for right after my 18th birthday. I packed my big suitcases, and I took my favorite clothes and $1,400 by myself to Mexico about 30 days after I turned 18. My classmates were still attending school here, and off I went. I didn't have anything prearranged. I didn't have a job. I didn't have housing, but I was just going to go figure it out. And so, as you can imagine, there were a lot of very hard life lessons learned, and I'm not going to have time to get into them all today here because we could be here all night. I could tell you about my second week in. Being the friendly, non-Spanish speaking person that I started a lovely conversation with a couple strangers in a restaurant in broad daylight on the main strip who tried to pull me into a car and kidnap me. Or I could tell you about how immigration stole all of my money, which amounted to $200 by then, along with my tourist visa. And I could tell you about how they tried to detain me for not having my tourist visa that they stole from me, along with my money 6 months prior. But like I said, we don't have time for all those details. But of the corruption, of all the negative experiences I had in Mexico, honestly, most of them were learning experiences I would never take back because they changed my perception of a lot of things. And growing up in a beautiful home with a giant, loving, and supportive family that I was so fortunate to have, it made me realize that not everyone has the foundation and the start that I got. And I'm forever appreciative for that. But there was one negative thing about Mexico that had long-lasting impact, and that was domestic violence. While there, I met someone and started what I thought was a fun courtship. And in a matter of just months, it became a very violent and life-threatening experience. Once you're in a domestic violence relationship, you begin to understand it a lot more than it sounds on the surface. Because had I talked about domestic violence up until that point, I hate to admit it now, but the reality is I would have said, victims of domestic violence just need to get their stuff together and pack their bags and hit the road, and who wants to put up with that? That's on you to leave. But then you're there, and you don't have any transportation, and you don't have any communication. I had no access to phone. I had no access to internet. I was beyond broke, and you really find yourself in a trap that you never, ever thought you would find yourself in. I think it is nice for us to all recognize that we've all had somewhere in our life, and if you haven't yet, unfortunately you will, where you say to yourself, well, what am I doing here? This was not the plan for me. This was not supposed to happen to me. But it did. And the violence started out, what I'll say is fairly minimal. No lasting damage, no marking. I was still shocked because it made me realize that no one in my entire life had ever really even been mean to me. But through the months, about 6 months, the incidents started to escalate. They weren't every day, and when you try to leave, you can't. It's not that easy. But once I got to the point where there were marks, I remember I had one incident where I was slapped open-handed in the face just one time. But it was hard enough to blacken my eye and bruise my face. And I had to miss a whole week of work because I couldn't possibly go show myself in public. When you're already in poverty, taking a week off of work, even when you make pennies, is negatively impactful in multiple ways. And I remember that the next incident escalated even further. And I found myself in a situation where I decided this time I was gonna fight back. And while pinned up against the wall, a cinder block wall in my apartment, I made the bold move of raising my once record-holding soccer-playing legs to propel myself off the wall into my abuser. His head hit the wall about 6 feet away, and I found out the hard way that fighting back was only going to make things more difficult. He spent the next minutes dragging me around the room, scraping the skin off my back, bleeding, held me down, face down, sat on top of me, and punched me with both hands until he's had his fill. And there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to run to. There was no one to ask for help in that time. And I'll warn you that you don't have to go all the way to Mexico, nor do your children, to end up in a violent relationship. You don't have to leave the county to experience the exact same situation I did, so don't get hung up on the fact that I might have been in Mexico. I knew at that point, after that incident, the way it was escalating, that I was in trouble and that I should legitimately be in fear for my life. And I started the process of exiting that relationship, but it can be very difficult because trying to leave incites more violence than you would ever experience without trying to leave. And so that turned into a long process. But I did get away, I did come back home, and I decided I was going to make the past and move forward. I started working in finance. I got a good job because I was bilingual and it paid to speak Spanish. And that job in finance continued to progress. I pursued every opportunity that was given to me to advance. And by the time I was about to turn 23, I was holding managerial licenses and training newly licensed stockbrokers 20 at a time coming into a major international firm. I out-earned my peers. I owned a home by myself. It looked like really that whole experience had had no impact on my life. But I did drink a lot. I drank every day. For those 5 years that followed that experience, my drinking escalated to the point where on a daily basis, I would drink, if it was wine, 2 bottles. If it was beer, it was 12 of them. If it was liquor, which at the end it was, because who wants to drink 12 beers, I would drink the whole bottle. No bottle of alcohol went to bed. It all got drank the day it was purchased. And I came to feel like, despite the fact that I was experiencing success, that I was out of motivation. I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and I ultimately confided in my father that I don't care about this job, I don't care about this house, I don't care about achieving anything. I just want to be left alone. And it was he who said to me, alcohol might be a factor in the way that you're feeling. It was something I had not even considered, but I could acknowledge that I was out drinking more than my fair share of guys at the bar, so maybe it's true. And so, reluctantly and dragging my feet, I went to go see someone who was an addictions therapist. And when I got there, I was not convinced at all that I had a problem. I certainly wasn't willing to say that I wasn't going to drink anymore. And I came in and she said, Keely, we believe that you have a substance abuse issue and that you would really benefit from treatment here. And I said, well, let's not be hasty. How do you think that I have a problem? I know a lot of people and they all drink just like I do. You start surrounding yourself with people just like you when you're struggling in addiction. And they said, well, Keely, on this intake questionnaire that you filled out, there are 50 questions, and here we consider 3 yeses of the 50 questions to mean that you have a problem with substance abuse. And of the 50 yes and no questions, you have 47 yeses. I've always been a go big or go home kind of gal, if you know what I'm saying. So I failed your test. Tell me more. And that began what was 3 months of outpatient treatment. And I was very fortunate that I had a job. I was paying into a short-term disability policy that paid my bills. I could afford to live. I had very small copays to go to treatment. I could afford to put myself through treatment. And if I'm here to say anything tonight, it's that I know a lot of people struggling in addiction, and they don't have any of those resources. They don't have access to any of those benefits. They didn't grow up in church 3 services a week with a foundation of faith. They didn't grow up with a massive supportive family saying nothing but, Keely, you're destined for greatness. That was what I came from. And I was so fortunate for that, but so many people experience trouble that don't have that foundation that need our support and help. I started getting sober, and I'm here to tell you the first couple of years of sobriety is very, very hard. Learning to recognize that you have a problem to begin with, going back to the stigma we talked about, that's the first obstacle to overcome. Saying I have this problem to begin with. And then next, what's probably the hardest part about getting sober is learning coping skills. You get very used to being sedated in a way. And I had a stressful job, but I did what I was supposed to do. I got up every day. I went to work. I prioritized my business. I was just drinking on the sidelines when nobody else was around. What does it hurt? But in sobriety, I realized that I had no coping skills. The smallest things made me angry, and it just felt like there was nothing fulfilling. It benefited me to learn a huge number of lessons, and I wish I could cover them all here tonight, and I can't, but I'm going to talk just about some of them. After I learned that I had a problem, and after I learned how to cope, which was very difficult, I learned that, like Dr. McAllister said, science shows us that not everybody's the same. Some of us are wired different. Some of us are more predisposed to being substance abusers, to self-medicating. And I was one of those people. The idea of pick yourself up by your bootstraps and carry on, don't let people know that you have a problem, that was the foundation of my self-medication with alcohol. I didn't even realize I had a problem until I quit drinking. You have to get sober oftentimes to actually see what's even there. I learned that when you get sober, you feel a lot of shame. When you tell people you've been sober for 9 years, they go, Keely, that's great. When you tell someone you've been sober for 41 days, they're like, oh, geez, hope she's not about to fall off the wagon. Wonder what she's been up to. Wonder how her life went so off track. Those are the feelings you experience when people talk to you and look at you as a substance abuser when you're honest. Lucky for me, I wasn't someone who cared too much what people thought even before all of that. So it wasn't too terrible to experience for me, but it could be because people bestow a lot of shame on you. One of my favorite authors, Seth Godin, teaches that there's so many things in life that we don't act on and do that we want to, strictly because we're afraid of the shame that people might put on us for not liking what we're doing. And shame we can only feel if we accept it in. Believe it or not. When people try to put shame on you, if you won't take it in and accept it, you don't have to experience it. And so I had to learn how to do that in early sobriety. I had to learn that life is not a meritocracy. Just because you do everything you're supposed to do and check off all your boxes doesn't mean that there's nothing but success and happiness in store for you. Like Christina said, you have to want it. You have to look for it. You have to believe that things can change. I learned that in many ways we teach people how to treat us. Whether that's fair or not, over long periods of time, in lots of little ways, we condition people how they can talk to us, how they can treat us, and what they can expect from us. And in sobriety, it really helped me to learn that and teach people to treat me in a different way than they had before. That made me feel more secure. I had to learn to wipe my mind a bit free because I'd spent a lifetime taking in information. And I came to realize that maybe not all of it was worth keeping. So I wiped my mind clean of all my preconceived notions, all the ideas I had already cemented in my mind, and decided to look at everything anew, fresh, and simplistically, which was also a huge benefit to me in getting sober and getting to better mental health. I had to learn, like Dr. McAllister said, there's science involved, folks. Addiction's all the same. Whether you're addicted to a substance, whether you're addicted to gambling, whether you're addicted to shopping, it doesn't matter. What you're doing is flooding your system with a release of dopamine, trying to feel better than you actually do. And when you trick the body into releasing dopamine, didn't know any of this until I got sober, until you trick the body into releasing dopamine, and those troughs in between those releases come to be very, very miserable because you don't have any happiness hormone that normal people have releasing itself gradually into the system. I had to learn that getting sober, it takes a long time for your body to restore normal function of dopamine. And the early sobriety is if it's not hard enough to totally change your life, physically speaking, scientifically speaking, you are not dealing with the same deck of cards until your dopamine levels can restore themselves. I knew when I got sober, one thing was sure, I was gonna have to find a way to be happy if I was gonna stay sober. And that actually meant I knew that I was gonna have to find a way to be happier than I was even before experiencing all that hardship. Going all the way back to being a teenager and just feeling a lot of dread and lack of fulfillment. And so finding a way to stay sober meant I was gonna have to transform my thinking and find a way to be happy, whether I knew how or not. In doing that, I had to learn a million things. To give a few examples, limiting thoughts. If you're sitting around saying, well, I couldn't do that because I'm not good enough, and well, I probably couldn't win because there's so many good applicants, those things are holding you back. Negative self-talk. I'm so far removed from it now, it's hard to remember, but an addict with a totally different issue of abuse came to me recently to confess that they're just buried in self-talk daily, just a constant criticism of who they are and everything they do and all of their shortcomings. And if you're here today and you experience a conversation or a voice in your head that's telling you with any kind of regularity that you're insufficient, that you're not enough, you've got to get rid of it. And maybe you don't know how on your own, but it's worth reaching out for help because that is not permanent. That doesn't always have to be there. And I promise you, if you have that, it's holding you back in your mental health. I had to come to accept that everything is not fair and just. I thought that life would be fair, really fair, and it's not at all, as you've probably all learned. And that no matter how much good you do and how much you care and how much you try to be the best person you can be, people are going to take advantage of you and people are going to betray you. And one thing that I learned about that, not only to accept that it's going to happen because that's life, but also recognizing that that's a reflection of who they are. When someone does you wrong, that doesn't mean it's a reflection, well, what did I do to deserve this? Well, what could I have done differently to not experience this? It's often nothing to do with us and everything to do with the void in somebody else's life. And we don't have to personalize that. I learned that holding resentment when those people betray us and wrong us is zero punishment to the wrongdoer and is a max sentence of suffering to the person holding the resentment. When I quit drinking for the very first time, I was furious about having been a victim of domestic violence. And honestly, it blew my mind. For 5 years, I would have told you every day that that experience meant nothing to me, that it had no impact whatsoever on my life. But I was sedated and I was wrong. Because the first thing 5 years later that I thought about getting sober every day was how furious I was that someone had treated me so poorly for no reason. I'd been carrying that around without knowing it for 5 years. And as long as I was at work staying busy or at home having some cocktails, it was easy to go unrecognized. I had to let go of that resentment, and I had to learn many other things. I had to learn that longing for the future, which is really what took me to Mexico in the first place, can be just as damaging to your mental health as stewing on a negative past. If you're someone that always thinks you'll be happy when you get to that next stop, when you get that next accomplishment, when you win that next feat, you're just in a perpetual cycle of disappointment. Because happiness, real happiness, and high-quality mental health don't come from winning a contest. I know that talking about these things makes a difference, that ending the stigma makes a difference, and that's what brings me here today and makes me passionate about these topics. And I'll tell you how I know it makes a difference. A couple of years ago, more than a decade after my domestic violence experience, from however many hundreds and hundreds of miles away Mexico is, I got a message one day on social media. I had clicked one simple button to share a post from a domestic violence organization, just informational, educational in nature. And shortly thereafter, I got a message. And that message said, "I saw what you shared today about domestic violence." This wasn't in English, this was in Spanish. She said, "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are, because when you left Mexico, you left some photo albums behind. And your former abuser still has those. And I spent 4 years of my life with him and left just 1 year ago. And for those 4 years, that girl had been subjected to the same nonsense that I had, and hearing, I've never done this before. I would never abuse anyone. This is only because you're you. This is only because you're insufficient. This is only because of your shortcomings. I would otherwise never be treating you this way. This is what you deserve." And through nothing more than sharing that post of information, she recognized that I had had the same experience she had, that it wasn't specific to her. And she went on to explain that now that I know that you were impacted in the same way I was, I know that I'm not responsible, and I'm gonna quit carrying that around with me and quit making myself feel like I need to improve and that it must have something to do with me as a person. I hope that knowing that whatever your story is, whatever story you have to tell about your hardship, whatever you've overcome, I hope that this night inspires you to share it with somebody at a time when it means something, because I think that we underestimate the impact we can have in just having open and honest discussion about mental health and addiction. I know that Speaking here today for each of these people was difficult, but I do know for sure, I think, that some of you are going to leave here tonight and your lives will be different from having been here and having changed your perspective. I'm going to close with this on that note and bring up Corporal Josh Blyle. Everyone's heard the Maya Angelou quote, "People will forget what you said and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And if you can be the person that provides even an inkling of hope to someone in their darkest hour, they will not only never forget how that made them feel, but you will never forget how you feel from serving that purpose in somebody's life. With that, I'll close. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to bring up, thank you so much.